A vet haunted by a deadly and mysterious force in the middle of the night. A giant creature watching from just above the treetops, and terrors from below that come out during floods. All these stories and more in today's episode. So sit back and try to steady your breathing. These assorted and allegedly true scary stories are nightmare fuel. If you have a scary experience of your own and want a chance to have your story narrated, share it with us at darkstories.org. I need just a few more trucker stories for an upcoming video. Now, let's begin. Horror on Holy Island, from Josh00. To give some context, my family on my mother's side is from Northumberland, in the north of England. Now, Northumberland is a beautiful place, fields and woodland as far as the eye can see. However, with it being one of the oldest and inhabited parts of the country, it's filled with dark, sinister history. As a child, I grew up on the holy island of Lindisfarne, a small but beautiful island that connects to the mainland by a road, or causeway, that is only passable for a few hours a day, the rest of which is covered by the cold, icy waters of the North Sea. That makes for a feeling of great isolation and loneliness whenever you find yourself on the island, as the majority of the time you're trapped there. As you can imagine, such an island is hardly the land of opportunity. So when I was 16, I moved to the mainland with my uncle Adrian to work in his garage, and I would be studying at Newcastle University, not too far from where he lives. I'm 18 now, but this all happened last November when I went home to visit my parents on the island. I set off around 8 p.m., 3 hours later than I should have, since I was working late on some car repairs, which meant that by the time I arrived an hour later at the causeway to the island, the road was already covered in a fine layer of crisp cold water. My '01 Vauxhall Corsa is hardly an off-roader, but still, I thought it could make it across with relative ease. But that was a terrible idea, as not even halfway across up the road the water was nearly up to the doors. There was no way I was going to make it across. Fortunately, there are raised structures, almost like tree houses, dotted down the road just for occasions like these. I pulled up to the nearest one, emptied my car for anything valuable, climbed the tall structure, and waited out the tide. The chilling November air froze me to my very core, whilst the tidal sound a few feet below me kept me constantly on edge. In just 15 minutes, my car was completely enveloped, whilst a thick fog had crept over, which, coupled with the inky darkness of the night sky, rendered seeing anything further than 20 feet away impossible. So there I was, stuck essentially in the North Sea with a half-empty bottle of water, a phone with no signal, a thick coat, and a torch I'd taken from the boot of my car. The tide would not subside until morning, meaning I would have a good 8 hours stuck in there. Hardly the best situation, made 20 times more terrifying when I began hearing strange, groaning, almost creaking sounds coming from below me. The sound was all-encompassing. It stretched out all around me, as if the ocean itself was crying out in pain. I was petrified. For a moment I thought maybe a whale had beached itself. So I peeked over the low fence of my temporary home, only to be met by the glaring gaze of a horrifying, humanoid figure with piercing, glossed-over eyes that seemed to swallow up all the light they were taking in from my torch. Only the torso of the creature was visible. The rest of it was submerged in the frosty waters, whilst its arms were grasping the damp wooden ladder I'd climbed myself. I let out a scream of pure fright, as once again my ears were filled with the horrendous groaning as the creature slowly began ascending the ladder. I frantically kicked at its head before mercilessly caving in its skull with my heavy metal torch. After several blows, the creature released its grip on the ladder and slipped back below the surface into the murky waters. I didn't sleep at all that night, instead keeping my eyes open for that disgusting creature, waiting to hear more of its petrifying screeches. The hours until sunrise felt like an eternity, but eventually the warm red glow of the sun crept over the horizon. Only when the tide had fully subsided did I feel safe to cautiously climb down the ladder and back to my car. No surprises, it didn't start. I walked up the causeway until I had enough signal to call my father and ask him to come and pick me up. I would explain on the way home what had happened to me. He was horrified by my story, even asking if I had taken any substances beforehand. Of course, I hadn't. Northumberland truly is England at its best, breathtakingly beautiful and a far cry from the cities so many miles away. However, be warned, its history is filled with druids and other such religious activity, and many other people have reported supernatural goings-on. But for anyone here or even abroad, it's definitely worth a visit. A Pool in the Woods, from TheForlornBat. This happened to a friend of mine. Back when I was in high school, I was a lifeguard at a really old pool in the woods, and like many old buildings and facilities, this one had its share of ghost stories. Things like pool equipment randomly falling or being misplaced, doors to the bathroom being swung open or unlocked despite the closers swearing that they had them locked, and on the odd occasion, we would hear laughter. On a typical weekday, no one really comes to the pool because there are a few beaches and lakes in the area as well, and people tend to go to those more often. There's fewer rules and more opportunities for barbecues and whatnot. So our boss usually let us go for swims until someone showed up. There have been times when I'd spend the whole day swimming or reading and listening to music, which was always fun with another guard around. However, because so few people go to the pool, there was usually only one guard per shift, unless the boss noticed that it was starting to get crowded. It was on one of these days that my friend had her experience. It was a weekday, though I don't know which, and it was around the 4th of July. I think the year was 2010 or 2011. Since no one was around, she was lifeguarding alone. At one point, she decided to go for a swim. She mentioned that she had been swimming for about 20 minutes, maybe half an hour tops. Up to that point, it had been very uneventful. The only sounds were her kicking at the water and a couple of bird calls. Typically, with these stories, people mention the world going quiet or getting muffled, but my friend claims that she had no such warning. At that point, she was doing laps across the pool, trying to beat a personal record. At the time, we had a little competition going on to see who could swim a lap the fastest. Just as she reached the middle of the pool, where it began to deepen, she felt a tug on her leg. Now, she had her lifeguard rescue tube floating in the water near her, just in case. She said that she thought her foot may have gotten caught in the strap of it, so she went to move it out of the way. But the next thing she knew, she was being pulled under, dragged under the water. She claimed that her stomach dropped and adrenaline immediately set in. Of course, she was a strong swimmer, but this thing was pulling her underwater, and all she could do was claw at the surface desperately. She said that it was the most horrifying thing, that helplessness. Knowing that you're going under and the only thing you could do is press your lips together and do your best to not inhale water. This happened in the span of maybe 30 to 40 seconds, but she said it felt like a lifetime. After the initial kicking and flailing, she was under the water just long enough to begin feeling dizzy. Just long enough to be certain that the next guard coming in for his shift would probably find her floating face down in the water. Now, we were aware that this spirit had a mischievous streak, but they had never done anything outright antagonistic. My friend thinks that this was a prank from the other side, because after that long panic, her attacker let go of her leg, and she could finally swim to the surface. My friend says that she'd definitely broken her record dashing out of the pool. She had scrambled onto the dock where she said that she lay there, just staring at the sky and canopy. She was thankful that she hadn't drowned. It just so happens that the boss was making her rounds and checking up on all the guards. But she didn't mention what had happened. She didn't want to put an end to swimming during free time. Though after that, there was an unspoken agreement between the guard staff that year that we would only be swimming when we had another lifeguard with us. Ever since then, I still went to that pool, even after I quit that job. A few years later, that pool, falling into a state of disrepair, was actually demolished to make room for a new pool. I feel as if the spirits probably didn't take too kindly to that, and I wonder if the new generation of lifeguards have their own tales to tell, or if the spirits vacated with the old pool now gone. Stories from Poland, from Dru-chan. Recently, I heard a story here about a creature in the Polish forest. In the story, the author claimed that Poland is not known for its paranormal events and creatures. It would be more accurate to say that the author is perhaps not familiar with those stories. Virtually every castle here has its ghost, some more than one. A lady in white, gray, or black. A knight or a monk, sometimes even children. Most of them have some stories and legends behind them. Most villages have their own stories of devils, drowners, or water creatures, or forest spirits that can help or harm you, depending on their mood, or if you're a good or bad person. And those who know our history will not be surprised to hear that virtually every old residential area has at least one haunted house. Personally, I don't believe all the stories, though both me and my family had some paranormal things happen to us. I'll begin with my great-grandmother. She lived in a village, in a really old house, without any toilet inside. One night she went out to relieve herself, and when she was outside, she saw her friend. At least, she thought it was her friend at first sight. But when she called out her friend's name, and her friend did not react, my great-grandmother tried to get closer. But then her friend disappeared. 1 second she was there, and the next she was gone. This scared my great-grandmother, so she went back inside, but for a while did not tell anyone about the story. The following day, she learned that her friend had died in her sleep. My great-grandma thought that maybe her friend appeared before her as a way to say goodbye. My grandmother, on the other hand, is Catholic, but even she used to see shadows and ghosts too when she lived in her village, mostly in the forest nearby. It seemed most spirits really liked nature, because when she moved to Warsaw, she didn't see them that often. She believed that people that passed on could watch over us and show themselves if they wanted to, but that they would never harm us. My cousin, though for some reason we all called her Aunt, lived in Krakow. She too used to see ghosts and spirits, even some shadow people and black dogs. They're not so common in Poland, and usually it's believed they are demons or devils disguised as dogs. While I don't remember much of the details, we didn't see each other in years. I still remember her talking about how often she saw weird things. My younger sister, living in Warsaw at the time, was scared of ghosts and demons and such. For a time being, she even believed some spirits may have attached themselves to her. Her now ex-boyfriend was into urban exploring and was in a place known to be possessed by some evil spirits or a demon. It was advised not to call anyone while being there, because ghosts may attach themselves to a person, or even the person you're speaking with, and guess what he did. For a long time after that, my sister would see shadows and would have terrible nightmares, hearing noises in the night. All these were stories I was told, but what made me believe that at least some of it is true was the fact that I'm no different than the rest of my family. Ever since I was little, I remember seeing things that I could not explain. People or creatures that no one else saw. Sometimes just shadows. Sometimes I would hear voices or whispers, and sometimes it would be just a feeling. A sixth sense, whatever you want to call it. Sometimes I would just be afraid. Like one moment I would be fine, and the next everything in me is screaming danger. I could feel a hostile presence, something watching me. Other times it would be completely the opposite. Even as a small child alone in the woods, or in a creepy old castle or house, or during a raging storm, sometimes I got this feeling of peace. Somehow, no idea how, I knew that I would be okay. As if something was watching over me, protecting me, comforting me from beyond. I just knew I was safe, and that there was no reason to worry. Now, there was one more thing. Sometimes I knew something was going to happen. These glimpses got rarer and rarer with me getting older, but I still can't explain how I knew some things before they happen. Here's an example. I think I was around 11 years old. Our whole school year had a 5-day-long trip. We'd be staying in a building which was supposedly haunted. One of the workers allegedly committed suicide, and her spirit was haunting our room. Despite the other kids feeling scared, or at the very least creeped out, I felt neither dread nor tranquility. For me, I was pretty sure the story was BS, but a few of my friends were terrified. So of course, as a mischievous little thing I was, I asked them if they wanted to summon a ghost, since I knew they were fascinated by all this paranormal stuff. We had no fancy Ouija board, or ever heard about them. Nope, instead we drew a circular pentagram to keep the ghost trapped, and lit a candle that I had earlier covered with nail polish with some glitter spark, so as it burned it would create this sparkling, unsteady flame, hopefully making it look like a ghost was messing with it. Then all I needed was to make my voice all deep and unsettlingly cold, while asking things like, "Are you not afraid to sleep tonight? What if you never wake up?" I'm pretty sure that to this day they really think I was possessed that night. One of them admitted she was terrified and couldn't sleep. She expected me to try to kill them or something. Don't really see much harm in it. At least it stopped them from experimenting somewhere that really was haunted and getting into trouble. Anyway, to this day, sometimes I get this weird feeling, like something is close by and watching. I still see shadows and hear whispers, and while deep down I'm still afraid, I think I found a way to deal with it all. Most of the time I just ignore all the shadows, and if that doesn't work, when they try to get close or talk louder, I tell them to screw off and shut up, as I'm trying to sleep. Apparently, even ghosts or demons don't want to upset someone screaming at them, as that command alone seemed to work. Just something to think about. Even if you're scared, that doesn't mean you can't scare them back. Warning: the following story contains depictions of harm concerning pets and animals. Something made them all go mad. From AshAlexander. I am a veterinarian in an emergency vet clinic. I was on night duty. We have a 2-story clinic. The second floor is used for food storage and supplies, and there's also a changing break room. At night, we lock everything down and we remote control all the doors. This particular experience happened around a year ago. In the clinic, we had 3 cats with feline distemper, which were all in the X-ray room as quarantine. In the infirmary, we had a female dog that had started giving birth and was being monitored, as well as a bearded dragon with burns. In the basement, we had a few strays and some dogs that were in hostel. In the break room, we have an elderly macaw that was abandoned, and we got attached. We had more animals, of course, but those are the ones that are relevant. That night, it was storming really bad. I had the door open in case one of the stray cats decided to take shelter. I was doing some paperwork, and nothing really was out of the ordinary. Yet. I checked on the mother giving birth. She had birthed 2 pups, and by the looks of it, had a few more to go. Everything was quiet except for the storm outside. Suddenly, I heard a bang upstairs. I thought it might have been a window or something along those lines. I went upstairs and one of the windows had opened. Outside it was pouring, and there was frequent thunder. I could hear the macaw screaming, so after I closed the window, I went into the break room. His cage was on its side, and he was freaking out inside it. I had no idea how the cage had fallen, so I took him out to make sure he wasn't injured or hurt. He was very aggressive, which was unusual for him. He's a gentle boy. Even when we got him after some heavy abuse, he was a sweetheart. He was even friendly to strangers. But that night, he was as vicious as could be. He managed to bite me quite badly. I had to get a towel to restrain him, and I had to leave him in his cage so I could go stop the bleeding on my arm. And I needed to get him a hood and some bandages for his feet. I tried opening the door, but it wouldn't budge. I tried multiple times to get it to open. The door does not have a lock. There's nothing there that could be blocking it either. I could hear the wind howling outside, but there was no way a draft could keep the door closed like that. I could hear barking from downstairs and wailing. I kept trying to open the door when all went quiet. The macaw stopped screaming. The wind stopped. The barking stopped. After a night of constant thunder, all was silent. I then tried to force the door open, and I fell through to the other side, because I had expected it to still be stuck, so when I pushed with all my weight, it opened like a breeze. The window was still closed, nothing to make a draft. I went downstairs and the rain had stopped. It was nothing more than a light drizzle. I quickly went back to check on the macaw. I was horrified at what I found. The poor boy. His body was in an awful twisted mess. His eyes were as small as pinheads. In his last moment, he was terrified. I took the poor thing downstairs to try and resuscitate him, but it was useless. Now, I know it's not uncommon for a bird to die of stress, and he was older, so I wasn't completely surprised. Procedures say that I would put him in a bag and take him down to the freezer, but at the time, I couldn't. I cared for him, and I wanted to mourn him. I went into the infirmary to get something to stop my arm from bleeding. Yet my horrors did not end there. The mother dog had killed her 3 puppies and was now panting in a panic. She too passed about an hour later during birth. Those 3 cats in the X-ray room were almost dead too. They had been thrashing in the cages so bad, one had managed to almost choke itself on his IV. Downstairs, one of the strays was also dying. The reason it was here was due to malnourishment, but it should have been fine. In that one night, that one storm, 9 animals died, and on the next day, that bearded dragon died from exhaustion. I have no idea what happened that night. We've had storms here before, never one that bad. Cameras show me going up and the doors slamming shut on their own, and that was it. We've never had such a thing happen. We've had storms, but never something to stress the animals out like that. I still work here. and it's been storming this whole week, and it's only getting worse and worse. Demons on the Ceiling, from Magnet Maeg. Nearly a year ago, I adopted a cat who had a small deformity. His right pupil was shaped oddly, and the day after I brought him home from the shelter, I took him to go get it checked out. I wanted to make sure my new buddy didn't need any medications or special treatment. It turned out he likely had an eye infection as a kitten. It caused the inner part of his iris to fuse to the outer ring, forming a perfect triangle in his eyes. Because of that, I named him Illuminati. He's an odd cat, to say the least. Loves belly rubs, plays fetch, and never tires of cuddles or attention. I'd say he was probably raised by dogs if I didn't know any better. Then again, he was afraid of dogs even half his size. Either way, he's a happy, mostly carefree pet. The only trouble he ever seems to get into is chewing up my hair ties if I leave them lying down. A few days after I got him, he was staring at the ceiling, which isn't unusual for a cat. My other cat does that too. But then I thought about what the vet had said, that he likely wasn't able to see well, which was made apparent when we found he wasn't able to land on his feet very well, and he was often misjudging his jumps, either onto furniture or off of it. I shrugged this off and did so for a while. Well, one day he would not stop mewing, loudly, just a constant caterwaul of mewing. Rather annoying too. So before I yelled at him to stop, I observed what he was doing. He was climbing a cat barrel, meowing once he was at the top, before jumping awkwardly down. Then he takes a few steps and jumps onto my rolling office chair. He meows again before hopping to the floor. Then he walks to a bookshelf, his front paws on the bottom shelf before shouting again. Wash, rinse, repeat. He was just traveling in an oblong circle trying to get as high as he could, without going where he wasn't allowed. And I think to myself, the heck are you doing, little boy? You're acting like a hound who treed a raccoon. And this thought alone gave me the idea to look up. And sure enough, there is a great big housefly on the ceiling. This is important, because I know he can see some things, mostly color or differences in colors. Whenever I have candles lit, he's not bothered. I've got plenty of them going all the time, so I know when he can or can't tell when something is there or not. And I've been seeing or feeling things my whole life. My mother even swears I must be a reincarnation of someone she used to go ghost hunting with years ago, the one who would do most of the communications for the group. And ever since the fly on the ceiling thing happened, Illuminati has done this no less than 5 times, and for the first few times it made me laugh, thinking about some comic or comics I've read, where someone points a laser pointer and has the cat chase it, but the cat believes that the pointer is a demon. But this thought made me paranoid. After all, why would he be circling and shouting like that, for nothing more than what appeared to be a fly on the ceiling? Nowadays, whenever Illuminati shouts and circles, I've gotten into the habit of looking for a bug or a strange shadow, even a reflection off of a phone screen, anything. I don't want to drop my defenses anymore and end up in contact with something I don't want to be in contact with. And yet every time I do, I usually feel the tightness in my throat and pressure around my belly. Telltale signs that although I only see my pet cats, my cats may be seeing more than just me. If it happens again, I plan on salting the windowsills and doorway, saging my room and anything else I need to do to keep them out. I can tell these spirits they're not welcome all I want, but just like a teenager faced with a "don't enter" or "no trespassing" sign, I know a demon will press my buttons. It's better not to provoke them, as so many stories out there have taught me. After all, we could really learn from other storytellers' mistakes. Something was waiting outside, from Sean D. My mother shared this story with me. When she was a young lady, she lived in the rural area of a town named Eminence. At any rate, it was an old house she lived in, with no indoor toilet. If you had to use the toilet, you had to go around to the back of the house and use the outhouse. They had a dog that was well trained. It was used to scare off raccoons and possums during nighttime restroom excursions, as well as warn them about any nearby snakes. It wasn't scared to scrap with anyone or anything. It was so well trained that you couldn't play baseball around it. If you tried to swing the bat, the dog would try to get your arm in its jaws and wouldn't let go until you released the bat. One night, my mom needed to go to the bathroom. It was darker than usual from a passing rainstorm, so my mom had grabbed an old Coleman lantern and got the dog on its leash. But when my mom grabbed the doorknob, the dog growled and gently took her wrist in its mouth, tugging at it until she let go, as if trying to lead her away. When she tried again, the dog whined and pulled on the leash, backing away from the door. It would not get near the door. She looked out the window, but nothing could be seen. But something was out there waiting, and only the dog could sense it. And whatever it was, the dog wanted nothing to do with it. After hearing about this, the whole family was nervous then. They stayed up watching the door and the dog both, wondering what could scare that dog so badly. Imagine having to go to the restroom, but being far too scared to even open the door. Mom says it was the longest night of her life. Giant creature visited me. From KitKatrearea. It took me a while to talk about this. Honestly, I felt as if people would think I'm off my rocker. A real crazy person. So I took a leap and asked around the other day to see if people wanted to hear my story about my encounter with a giant creature. I live in central Alberta, but at the time I was living in northern Alberta. I can't disclose where it was exactly, as it's my parents' property, and they've got enough issues with people trespassing to party at the old stone house at the back end of the place, as well as other people just snooping around looking to loot. This happened 3 years ago. My daughter and I lived in the same town as my sister a couple blocks away, in an apartment above a few abandoned stores. Admittedly, I didn't have the best relationship with my neighbors across the way. They acted strange around me all the time. Over a couple of months, I had issues with coming home from sisters and noticing food was missing, or things in general were missing, and the TV channel would be changed on my TV. My shampoo or conditioner would be a little more empty. My daughter's clothes would randomly go missing. All of this I tried to chalk up to me overthinking everything. However, I would soon be proven wrong, as my sister eventually left my niece's father and moved back in with our parents at their property. My daughter and I went out to my parents one time to babysit for just over a week for my sister. The night before I was supposed to go home, I received a call from a police officer. He had asked if everything was okay, asking where my daughter and I were located. I'd informed him what was going on. Long story short, the people across the hall broke into my place, trashed it, and called the police on me. I was horrified. Here I'd been at my parents' helping my sister, and out of nowhere I nearly lose everything, including my daughter, because the condition those people left my place was terrible. The next few weeks were hard on me. I had to return home and clean up their mess. People in the building looked down on me and often talked behind my back, calling me names. Eventually, I couldn't take it. I ended up back at my mom's place after 2 weeks. While at my mom's, I received a message on my Facebook from some stranger I didn't know. It was the very first night I was back there, maybe 11 p.m. He sent me pictures of the inside of my apartment, called me names, repeated some of the conversations I had had over the phone, basically admitting to breaking in and stealing things from me. I broke down into tears and ran outside to my mom's car. Once inside, I called my friend and told her about the messages and everything that has happened lately. My friend, Sarah, tried to calm me down. It took a bit, but once I did, I felt better. By then it was roughly midnight. She proceeded to tell me about her day, when an eerie feeling washed over me. You know that feeling you get of being watched, when someone or something is watching you? That was it. I glanced up from the steering wheel and looked out over the windshield. I looked up toward the top of the trees to see two large, glowing red eyes about the size of tires on a kid's bike. To give you a sort of visual, when you pull into the driveway, to the right there are trees. The driveway is a bit uphill, and once you nearly reach the top, there's a fork. The road going to the left goes down a hill onto the main area of the property where the fireplace is. Garden, swings, etc. A big open grassy area. Beyond that is a large field that my dad and his family harvest bales for farm animals. And on the other side of the field is even more trees, a couple of hills to the right, and that's about it. If you take the road curving to the right, it leads you to the front of the house where the driveway ends. The house is to the left of the driveway, built into the side of the hill, and overlooking the field at the end of the driveway is the small garage and dog pen. Now, whatever the eyes belonged to, it was a good 40 feet away from me. The tree line is about 20 feet away, so it would be roughly 20 feet into the trees, I'm assuming. It was pitch black at this point, so I'm not entirely too sure how far in it was. But that thing was huge. Its eyes were like flashlights that lit up the top of the trees. This thing reminded me of the Iron Giant, if you've seen that movie. It looked away briefly, then back at me. I was so scared I couldn't even scream. "Hey, Sarah," I whispered into my phone, trying to be as quiet as possible. Sarah asked what was wrong, so I explained what I was looking at. She was a good friend and believed what I was saying. The thing stood still for what felt like hours, just watching me before finally walking away. Meanwhile, Sarah was trying to talk to me about anything and everything to calm my nerves, to take this off of my mind. Once the creature left, she tried to convince me to open the door and make a run for the house, which was only 8 feet away. But I couldn't move. What if it came back when I opened the door? I asked Sarah this, and she laughed, calling me a big chicken, and told me to just run. But I decided to listen to my gut feeling. I remained in my mom's car. And just as I thought, that thing came back. Only this time it seemed to pace up and down the tree line, watching me the entire way. It seemed to be waiting for me to make a run for the door. I watched it through the windshield, pacing back and forth at least 7 times or so, before turning its attention elsewhere, then back to me. I felt trapped. I knew that this thing could flatten the car with me in it, if it wanted to, or even pick the car up and just toss it away. I'm not sure how long I was in that car, but thankfully at some point my mom opened the house door to check on me, and for whatever reason, the creature took off. I quickly hung up the phone after saying a quick bye to Sarah and took advantage of my mom now standing on the deck to run inside. Once back in the house, I told my mom to lock all the doors and close the curtains. My mom asked what was wrong, and of course when I told her the story, she didn't believe me. I went and sat down on the couch, not getting much sleep that night, and I was scared to be outside after dark for a while. I only ever saw it that one time, and to this day I have no idea what it was. If anyone knows, if anyone has any idea, I'd love to hear what you think. Well, this brings us to the end of this Darkness Prevails episode. But don't worry, more scary stories are on the way. So stay tuned, and be sure to send me your scary stories at darkstories.org. I'd love to narrate them. I'm still looking for a few more trucker stories, and be sure to follow me on Spotify for my podcast episodes. Until next time, here are the credits to my amazing patrons who continue to donate or have donated in the past. Remember, stay safe out there and stay creepy, because this world is a strange one.